Sweet. Also, I think I need to do some updating on my internet. We're live, by the way, but I think sometimes
Yay.
what I hear from you is getting delayed because of my internet. So if I ever
Mm.
seem to cut you off, hopefully it's not. It's obvious that it's not on person and it's just a delay on my end. But I hope that doesn't happen.
I'll expect a few after yous. I have the same problem over here, but to be
Okay.
honest, I think part of it is also I really struggle at reading like when is the appropriate time to jump
Yeah.
into a conversation. So like I won't hold it against you if you don't hold it against me. Let's put it that way.
Absolutely. Well, we do the compressed FM podcast, and we have 4 hosts, and then we bring on guests. We alternate doing guests or host only versus bringing on a guest. And we stumble on each other all the time. But if we're in person and we can actually see, like when you gather or like you do a little bit of body movement as you're getting ready to speak, you could see that a lot more when you're in person. So it's a lot easier for us to kind of nail transitions and stuff when we're in person versus just the limited scope that we have on video. So yeah. So question was, I think you're not going to be able to make it to C3 in person, which I'm not either. And I originally was supposed to, and I'm super bummed about, but are you doing
I
anything
know.
else in person soon event wise?
So the problem was originally I have React Finland was a
Hmm.
conference I wanted to go to for ages,
That's
and I
fun.
was supposed to go, but then the pandemic happened, and so
Mm,
I didn't get to go. And then big life changes happened. I still didn't get to go. And finally, I was like, "Yes, I will come in 2024. I promise." And it became Future of Front End, and so I committed to
mm.
that. And then C3 was like, "Hey, you want to come speak too?" And I was like, "Absolutely." Meanwhile, these two organizations hadn't figured out what their day was. It turned out they conflicted. And so I had to say yes to the original yes, but I did record a special high value production of my infamous new talk, um, How to Be an Adult in Professional Relationships, which is actually part of a book I've been writing. So it's like the outcome of my studies, my culmination of working in open source and big tech and working in oh my gosh in startups.
Yep.
There's plenty of resources out there about how to get a job in tech, but there are so few resources on how to like survive, how to work with other human beings, how to like figure out if you're the bad guy in these different situations. Like we're all quirky people and we have to work together,
Hmm.
and there are a lot of unwritten rules that can be hard to grasp in each of these situations. So this is what I'm sharing with folks, is what I've learned on my journey, and hopefully it'll help other people get to where they're going faster.
Love that. That's so good. And as I was kind of reading through your talk description, I um I was thinking through a couple specific scenarios that I've had in my career and kind of reflecting on them and thinking about maybe what would your advice be or maybe similar situations that you've had. So we'll be able to get into a couple of different aspects of that. I'll give, we're a couple minutes in, so I'll just give context for everybody that's here. One, welcome. If you're joining us, just let us know in the chat that you're here. If you're comfortable with it, share where you're from. It's really cool for me to see people joining from all over the world. I think that's a ton of fun. So if you feel comfortable sharing that, and we kind of really briefly mentioned C3. So I do want to put a couple of links in here for people that there is React Summit and C3, as well as JS Nation, are back to back days in Amsterdam. And I'll put a link in here for React Summit and C3. And my original plan was we were just talking about this, to be there in person for React Summit at C3. Unfortunately, for another overlap that I have, I won't be able to make it, which makes me really sad.
Yeah.
But what we're doing is a couple of interviews with speakers, and Rachel is speaking on the topic that you just mentioned about working with others. And I've got some questions about like how to handle frustrations. What are the different differences between working at different size companies, and how to enforce boundaries and feel comfortable enforcing or creating and enforcing boundaries. So anyway, we're going to talk kind of all that. This is relevant to your talk that you're giving in a couple of weeks. Won't be there in person, but there's a couple links in the chat to the events if you want to find out more about it. If you're in Amsterdam this summer, I also, for reference, have a 10 and 15% discount code for both of those that I'll put in the chat in a second as well. But all the context there. Rachel, do you want to do like a 1 minute just kind of intro to who you are and what you do?
Sure. Hey there. I'm Rachel Nabors, they, them pronouns. You may remember me from my work on the Web Animation API with Mozilla back in and the W3C, or more recently from my work with the React core team pushing React.dev and React Native.dev to fruition. Best ways to learn React on the internet, I should hope. Check them out if you haven't already. And currently, I am writing a book on how to survive your tech career. You can watch it being written live at Nearest Neighbors. That's Nabors .substack.com. And yeah, I'm going to be speaking at a couple of conferences this summer. I'm actually next week just about to embark on a whole block of speaking events. And as I travel around the world, I'm going to be going to Poland for Code Europe, up to Finland for Future of Front End, and I'll be swinging by Seattle for Cascadia JavaScript.
Oh, cool.
And I do plan to poke my head in on config in the Bay, although I won't be speaking there.
Very cool. Those are lots of fun events. Cool. Do you mentioned kind of one of the bullet points I sent you as maybe a good one to start with, and that's looking at the differences or the potential differences in terms of maybe struggles that you have of working with other people when you compare working at a startup, really small company, or maybe doing open source, something like that, versus working at like a bigger major company. And for reference, for my background, I started my career at Microsoft, multi 100,000 employee. I went to FedEx, multi 100,000 employee, and then I went to my smallest company at the time, which was other people's biggest companies at the time, which is Auth0, 600 people, went to Planet Scale, which was under 100, and now I work for myself. So it's been kind of like down in size since I started.
Then you've got to have some opinions here, um, and and I want to hear them. So from my side, there's a complete difference between working in like open source, working, taking contract work, maintaining repos, contributing to standards and specs as a freelancer, and working inside a structured for profit organization. That was a pretty big change in the first place. It really changes your communication patterns, for instance. Open source tends to attract people who are very direct and blunt, whereas the skills you need to survive inside a structured workforce require a little bit more decorum, a little bit more tact, and the ability to feel other people out and what they're ready for. Soft skills can be dismissed, but easily dismissed in technical professions, but the truth is you do need soft skills when you're working inside a capitalist organization. The other thing, of course, is smaller companies, startups, they move faster. There's less red tape. You don't have to ask for permission. There is one caveat, though, because they're smaller, there's fewer layers between you and people you may not jive with. And in the end, like the founder, the person who's the owner of the company, what they say goes. There's not going to be a committee. There's not going to be a discussion. You really have to be like, yes, sir, or yes, ma'am, and hop to it. There's not a lot of room to be circumspect. So it's sort of an all-in thing. It's really great when you're like transitioning from junior to senior. It's like that's the perfect time. But if you're, coming in at staff or director level, once again, you're gonna need those soft skills to be able to work with people who have strong opinions. It's their baby. And you're going to need to be able to navigate them, not just deliver, like deliver great code or deliver a great product. Delivering looks different at those levels and becomes much more interpersonal. Inside larger companies, things move slower. You're not going to be shipping something great every 6 months. Earlier in my career, that was a major no-no for me. I had to ship. Shipping was like, if it was Friday and I wasn't shipping, I felt itchy. It was like, I can feel the decay. And yeah, but that can be really great when you're in a part of life where you don't want to be shipping code at 4 a.m. You don't want to be, pulling in all-nighter with pizza on the weekend. Maybe you just want to like walk your dog on the weekend or play with your kids. So slower is better at different phases of our lives. And you really have to ask yourself, where am I in this trajectory? What skills do I want to hone, whether they're soft or technical? And what kind of a position do I want to be in? What about you? What's your experience been like? I see you gravitating towards smaller and smaller.
Yeah. I feel like it's probably a natural thing for a lot of people as they progress in their career, although I could definitely see people doing it the other way. I think the interesting thing though is at least initially Microsoft was not it wasn't a planned thing. Like I didn't have any concept of what I was walking into at Microsoft. I didn't know what to compare to. I didn't know that startups were an option at the time. So Microsoft recruited on campus. Long story short, I got turned down for 2 roles, and then they came back and said, "What about this third role, which was developer advocacy?" And I was like, "I don't know what that is, but you're Microsoft, and I would love to figure out what that is." And so I did that. And again, I was fresh out of college, so I didn't know what to compare to. It was very big. I thought I was like really overwhelmed and excited that one of my first days was at this big, huge conference where they spent millions of dollars to bring people in from all over the world to Atlanta and rented out arenas and had concerts and stuff. And that was really cool. Again, coming from not knowing what professional work was. I think one specific struggle I had at that point was we were a bunch of teams across the US in major cities. The our director equivalent, what I don't remember what his title was, GM maybe. Well, like manager's manager was in San Francisco and I was all the way on the East Coast and a lot of the people that started out of college were also in San Francisco and I was the one person who didn't start near other people. I was kind of in a on an island by myself in South Florida. And because of that, I felt like they got a lot more visibility for being next to the GM that I feel like I didn't have. And I think that was a struggle. It wasn't necessarily a reflection of like this being this major company, but because it's a big company, developer evangelism at the time was big enough to be segmented throughout the country and other countries to the point where there was this disconnect between my skip level and the things I was doing, and I think the awareness of that versus some of the other people who actually got to sit right next to him. I think a lot of that has changed because so much of it is remote completely now. But that was definitely one of the struggles I had. And then I was just curious. After that, I wanted to go to a more modern tech company than FedEx was at the time. So I left FedEx, went to Auth0, which was much younger, but I was just looking for something that was more relevant to the things that I was interested in and came across it, enjoyed it. And then from there had this interest in like, okay, I can see how going even smaller, you have the potential to make even more impact and move quicker and all the things that you said.
Absolutely. And one of the things you said there was interesting to me. You mentioned you think that the need to be present to make those connections and be visible is changing with more
Hmm.
work remote friendly policies. I mean, as a person who started a new role while most of the people had not returned to office and also worked with interns, I can say that in some situations, like for companies that have not fully adopted a remote first work strategy, it's even worse. There's no way, even if you're on site, to learn some of these things that, sometimes big companies, they did not adopt any of those strategies. And so all the stuff that you would have picked up at the coffee cooler, that knowledge is completely unavailable to you. It wasn't written down anywhere because everyone on the team remembers it and they all work together fine. And why are you so slow at picking it up? And it was really stressful for the interns to have nobody in the office. And I would say this is something I would actually push on leadership for is, it's one thing not to favor people who are in the office, but it's another thing to disadvantage people who are showing up in a place that you aren't. Try to build in policies and practices that make sure that people are checking in no matter where they are or where you are. It goes both ways.
I'm curious. So this is a little bit different of the main topic, but I feel like still relevant. The idea of bragging versus communicating what you're doing. And that was part of my struggle at the time was I felt like because I
Mhm.
was further away than the people that sat next to the GM, I also didn't feel like a naturally braggy person. And so I didn't know how do I get the things I'm doing in front of him, especially when I'm not in person. So any suggestions on like how and when do you share and what's the balance of sharing the good things that you're doing and sharing that confidently versus coming off as bragging?
This is a tough one, especially if you're from a minoritized group. Women are historically in a double bind here, because on the one hand, people aren't going to notice or attribute women's work statistically as much as they will a man's. So women are trained to, speak up, share your project,
Yeah.
share your work, or find someone, who will do that with you and like echo, oh yeah, Karen did this great thing. But the problem is if you advocate for your work on your own, especially as you start going up, becoming senior, etc. It's like everyone loves the junior, but then when you become the senior, suddenly you're arrogant. This is a common problem for women in tech, and so after a while, they're penalized for saying anything about their work and showing it up, but they are also not having anyone notice or show their work. Period. This is a fine line to walk, and even other women are not aware of the biases that are inside them, that they might hold, the grudge they might have against a woman who's being too showy. So I just wanted to bring this up as we're talking about sharing work versus bragging, that bragging is largely subjective. It's largely on the receiver's end. I think the best thing you can do is to work on building a team culture that promotes show and tell, sharing. Like have a show and tell wrap up at the end of the week. Do brown bags where people come and they share what they've worked on together. Make it a part of the culture that people share and praise and critique one another's work openly, so that there's nothing weird about Karen bringing her pet project to the show and tell, or you saying, I just wanted to point out last week I went to this conference and I learned all these different things from these people. There should be a formal, highly visible area where people can do that. Preferably over a medium that people who work off-site can join
Yeah.
as well.
Yep. Absolutely. I think that's so good. Someone else in the chat mentioned just negative stereotypes still existing, kind of like you mentioned, and then also similar struggles with people of color. You may have said generically groups in general, and then talked about women. I can't remember exactly, but yeah, I think all of that kind of goes hand in hand. And the place to share is awesome. It's something not with that intention specifically in mind. I approached it from more of I just want to learn from everyone that's doing good stuff, and we all have so much to share. And I, in two different places, actually set up like a lunch and learn type thing where I was like, hey, you're working on a thing, come and tell us about it. But to your point, that's also an opportunity for them to share. And I think the thing as you progress in your career, I think about your sphere of influence growing. So as you're a beginner in your career, your first role or whatever, your sphere of influence is really you, right? Like you're just doing what you can to learn to do your job. As you become a senior, now your sphere of influence is like I'm teaching people around me, the people who are earlier in their career than I am. Now my sphere of influence is growing a little bit. Maybe it's on the same team that I'm on, but I'm able to help impact and teach and kind of lead a little bit. Then you think about going into whatever the titles are that people have, principal or I don't know what a principal. You think about your sphere of influence kind of grows depending on the size of the company to other teams and maybe the company as a whole if it's a smaller company. And with that sphere of influence, I think you have the ability to have your work speak a little bit more for itself at times because other people are aware of it. And the more people who can advocate for you, the better. Now that's maybe still a challenge to get to, of like, how do you get to more people knowing the things you're doing? But when that sphere of influence increases, you have that many more people who have at least had experience with you that can share to their managers, or maybe you have a formal end of year review where you get quotes and testimonials from coworkers or whatever. But that sphere of influence, I think, is pretty important in one, being able to progress in titles and showing your value, but then also having that value be spoken through other people so that you're not having to do it as much yourself.
That latter one can be really hard though, especially
Yeah.
for minoritized folks. Um, yeah, it can be tough. I think it's one of the reasons that we notice such a big uh, decline, especially the further up you go. It's just
Mm.
storytelling becomes sometimes a full-time job for some folks,
Yep.
and this is another issue you have to keep an eye out for, the person who is spending more of their time focusing on telling their story versus actually delivering their role. You don't want to end up that person. So
Yep.
building in ways to get that feedback as you go along rather than doing it in the waterfall style waterfall style at the end of the year or just before reviews. Like when you complete a push,
Yep.
go ask everyone, like, here's a form, fill in what went well, what didn't go well, any feedback you have for me, make it super, super easy for people to give you those sound bites and those quotes. And then just pick through them, get what you need at the end. Make it a regular part of your cadence,
Yep.
not a full-time job or some monumental thing that you have to push through, or, oh, this person's only sniffing around because now they want to hear something good. People have a
Yeah.
short-term memory. Ask them right after the thing went well
Yep.
or didn't go well.
Yep.
If it didn't go well, show how you've been acting on that feedback to improve things over the year.
I think the showing that this is a much deeper conversation. I'm going to move into a new topic in a second and not go too deep into this, but I think um, what you just said of showing people that you care about feedback is one of the biggest things that you can do, especially if you get direct feedback from a manager, like to see that I take it seriously and to see progression. Or if I was a manager and I saw that someone took it seriously and they were actually working on that thing, that is huge. And like you said, getting the feedback throughout the year and just have a folder somewhere in your computer of screenshots and emails so that you don't forget when it comes time to write your version of the story too at the end of the year. Because most of us finish the year and we forget, just like you said, other people have short term memories. So do we. We don't remember all the amazing things that we've done or the positive feedback we've gotten. So if you can take that and just organize it in a place so that you have it, that I think is huge. Nikki T on Twitch said, we did this when I worked at McAfee, I think talking about like lunch and learns. We ordered lunch, did demos. We did this in Netlify, also did this at open source as well, but remote. Also record demos, meetings, or have the notes available for anyone who can't make it or maybe isn't in person to watch. I think the in-person, mostly that's solved. I think we stream or at least Zoom, like most things, at least from what I've seen. So hopefully that is a standard that people are saying as well. Jason said, learn from everywhere. The fact that any type of person gets negatively affected due to anything but their work is ridiculous. Fair. Also, your chair makes it look like your headphones are huge. I think just like the white part coming out from the headphone, like the white part of the headrest looks like the headphones, which actually does look kind of cool.
Well, that would be kind of awesome. I mean,
Yeah,
I like this idea a lot of having gigantic Mickey Mouse style headphones.
I know. I think that would be fun. So one of the things I wanted to transition to is the idea of setting boundaries, and I think we hear this all the time, the cliche of people getting upset. Well, so and so is messaging me on Slack at 7 o'clock my time, and to me, I see a lot of people spending a lot of negative energy on that while also responding versus the actual enforcing of the like if I'm a 9 to 5 person, unless there's an absolute emergency, you have to kind of enforce that. And I told you I've got a little bit of a controversial quote that I'm curious to get your take on, and that is, it's not other people's responsibility um to respect your boundaries. It's your responsibility to enforce them. Now, one caveat is I'm not saying that I just walk around disrespecting and not paying attention to people's boundaries. I'm saying when it really comes down to it, the thing we can control is trying to enforce the boundaries. We can't fully control that people actually respect them. We can only control that we make it clear and communicate and try to enforce them that way.
This reminds me of a conversation I had with a friend. What you said, it's not on other people to respect your boundaries, it's on you to enforce them. Has this ever happened to you? You have this friend and they're going along, they're going along, they're going along, and then suddenly they blow up at you and they're like, I never wanted to do that thing. And you're like,
Hmm.
this was the first I heard of it.
Yeah.
Was I supposed to know
Know
this? I
that
mean, I
originally.
understand
Yeah.
friends are close, but mind reading is a bit of a stretch. That sounds like enmeshment, which is also unhealthy. Being able to anticipate and read another person's every needs is not good. That's a trauma response. And there are people in power who expect that of their, they call them dogs bodies in the UK, which is where I live, which means it's a person who's just 100% like a personal assistant who anticipates everything. Then, your girl Friday. That's not necessarily a healthy place to be. And it is on you to communicate your boundaries, and it's also on you to respect your boundaries first and foremost. I agree with you on this. Like it's also kind of heartbreaking, as me
Mm,
as so I care about this person a lot, and suddenly they're telling me that I have been hurting them, and they let me keep hurting them, and I did not know to stop because they never told me please stop.
yep.
That's terrible. That would be like finding out that the water has been too hot when you've been washing a puppy, but it never
Mm.
whined. And so you didn't
Oh,
know. And the poor puppy is now like burned and sad.
yeah.
And you're like, oh, you feel like a terrible person. So that actually hurts
Yeah.
trust because now the person on the other side, because they did not realize they were hurting you, did not realize you had a boundary that you were not enforcing. Now they don't trust you to say stop. So everything's going to be tentative. Are you sure you have time to work on that on the weekend? Are you
Mm,
sure you don't have something else you're supposed to be doing? Are you sure? Are you sure? Are you sure? That is a lot of emotional labor.
yep.
So just be upfront. Practice a good no with a period after it. If somebody is messaging you at 7 p.m., one, you don't know. They might have like a kid crying in the background, and this was the only time they
Mhm.
had where they could respond to your messages.
Yep.
Do you have to respond immediately? Is it on fire? Or can you set Slack to just have those working hours so that it's, observing by default? Maybe you could have a conversation about it. That always is a good place to start talking about, hey, yeah, I don't take things after 6. Well, I'm going to probably message you after 6. Do you think you could just ignore them?
Yeah.
Or, I could also probably schedule my messages to go after 6. But then once again, the labor is being put onto me to observe
Mhm.
your boundaries. Whereas we could just have a truce agreement that I'll send you messages and you won't
Yep.
respond, and that's okay. And I'll call you if there's an emergency. Anyway, I flipped off on that one. You touched a nerve because it is important. Communicating boundaries is so important. Good fences make good neighbors. They make good coworkers and friends too.
Oh, what a quote, especially I know it's spelled differently, but given your last name. That's an amazing quote. But yeah, I'm the
Oh,
exact
I'm gonna put
same.
that in my care and feeding guide.
Yeah.
Good fences make good neighbors. Set
Yep. You should
boundaries.
have a t-shirt. Um, yeah, that's my exact take, and especially the understanding of the situation. Like, I don't care if you message me after my hours, as long as the expectation is set that like I'm not respond unless I just am like having a chance and I want to be on my laptop. Like, I'm not going out of my way to be on my laptop after hours to respond to something again, unless there's an expectation as a team where if something does happen and it's a big deal, we need to be there. There's actually a great question in the chat from someone that says, what if people get upset at you for not being a team player? This is a great question. And also reminds me a little bit of my time at Microsoft. And I started my career, my wife and I at the time, early on in my career at Microsoft, we were married. My wife and I are almost a cliche couple, I would say. We do everything together. We play soccer together, we run together, all the things. Like we play golf together. We do everything together. There's no time where I just need to get away. That's not, this doesn't exist for us. And so for me, when I would work at Microsoft, I would get done at 5 or whatever, and I'd be ready to go home and spend time with my best friend. And I'm not trying to be super cliche. That's just how it is for me. And there were other people who didn't have relationships, just different phase of life or scenario or whatever. And I think sometimes they would stay later and do more, and I would get judged for not doing more. And it was just very important for me of like, I want to go spend time with my wife and then eventually like family. And I think I would be looked at times in that scenario as not being as much of a team player. So any thoughts on the judgment with that of enforcing your boundaries and people looking at that as you not being a team player?
I think that's another, like, how do I put this? That's a them problem, not a you problem. You can't change other people's perception of your behavior. Like, you have two options here, except that they're gonna call you not a team player, or you could try to change their minds. That never works, so let's just, like, let's ignore that one. You can't change how people think.
Yep.
Um, or you could challenge the culture, which also usually doesn't work out. If the
Mm.
culture of the team that you're on is one such that you having boundaries is seen as a big no-no, think about that in a relationship relationship. If you had a relationship where, you going home at a certain time, like a friendship or something, was seen as bad, and your friend was actively like, I feel like you don't like me because you go home at 5 to be
Hmm.
with your spouse. We wouldn't call that a healthy relationship.
Yeah.
You might sit your friend down and be like, okay, my family's very important. And maybe your friend would listen to you, but an entire team is unlikely to see things
Yep.
from your direction. I would say in that case, you probably want to migrate yourself over to another team that has more people like you, people who have families, people who have outside commitments, and maybe isn't on that stage of their career where they're willing and able to pour that much time in. That is the real world advice. We can't always get away, though. And I'm curious if you have thoughts of what people who can't leave the situation can do to still try to, you know, have a good reputation on the team, but
Yeah.
not just cave and give over to the groupthink of the team, as it were.
Yeah. I think one of the things that I thought about was just kind of gauging those worthwhile opportunities to show up. And so occasionally staying out later, going to support another person's event, going to one of their talks. If they're doing a workshop, showing up and helping people in the audience, helping them guide through the workshop, et cetera, to make sure that it's obvious that it's not just me running away from the situation every time. I have responsibilities at home and I have enjoyment of home and life and family, but I also will go out of my way to make that effort for other people. And I think it's just looking at kind of a priority of it, like not selfishly, which one do I get the most out of? Maybe it's for the limited amount of time after hours that I have to invest, which one will get the most out of for the team is maybe a way to look at that and make sure that it is obvious. I do show up, but I just don't do this every day. And it's not the everyday norm for me because I have responsibilities at home.
That's one way, yeah. And also, you could prioritize things that are highly visible.
Hmm.
The Another thing you could look at is, okay, so maybe you're not able to show that you're a team player in that way, but is there another way that you can pull through in some way that other people aren't? Is there
Mm,
some chore, like, okay,
yeah.
say you're on a team where nobody documents anything because they don't
Yep.
have the time. Maybe you just happen to start documenting things
Yep.
and sharing it about, and you're doing that work that no one wants to do, and making their lives easier. Some teams will
Yep.
notice that and recognize it, and so maybe you're not showing up to go drinking every Friday night, but you
Yep.
did, document all the processes that made it so easy to onboard those interns. And people are thinking, "Wow, it's so great that I don't have to spend hours showing the interns how to get up and running. And they just use this
Yeah.
this get started guide. Thank you so much for that." So maybe there are other ways that you can be a team
Yeah.
player, and do that in exchange.
I love that. Another one that comes to mind, similar to what you're saying, is if a teammate, for example, is giving a workshop, instead of showing up to the workshop if it's after hours and I can't do that, can I spend time during the day to run through the workshop as an attendee and provide feedback and say, hey, maybe you missed this. Maybe I can open PRs on the documentation to actually update those missing steps or screenshots or blah blah blah. I think that would be another way to do that. And one small thing that I try to do, and I feel like all of this goes back to like getting visibility for yourself in an impactful way without bragging. It's contributing in a way that people actually notice, ideally. One other thing is a lot of times this happens where people post on a team Slack or something, hey, I've been working on this thing. Anybody have any feedback? And you hear nothing. Like that happens so often. If you can be that person that shows up to spend 5 minutes to go look at the thing, provide feedback, and just show that you're one, regardless of it being after hours, like you're going to show up when you can for people when they're looking for help, as an example, in Slack. I think that's a relatively small one, but also you notice those people who show up consistently for you.
That's excellently put. One other thing here about being a team player, and I hear this a lot in London because there's a huge drinking culture in London. People go to the pub after work, and if you're not at the pub drinking beers, which I don't like beer,
Hmm.
sorry, it's not my thing. I prefer tasty wine
Yeah.
or delicious tea. And most of the after hours places don't have things I want to drink.
Yep.
So I might go but I'm not exactly gonna, you know, chum it up that way. So what do I do to have fun with people? Well, for me, I run a tea salon once a month and I invite people
Hmm.
to it who like tea and they come and go as they like. I also have board game night. And these are ways that I invite people to spend time with me on my terms in ways that I like. You can do this in the office too. Maybe you aren't going to all the boozers, but maybe you arranged a cupcake brunch once a month that everybody gets to come. There'll be other people like you who appreciate the opportunity, and you'll get a reputation as being a team builder, as opposed to the person who's hanging back and not participating. You're going to make things happen that you want to participate in.
I think that is so good. I actually wasn't going to go down that specific path, but something we said 2 minutes ago triggered the exact same thought for me. So I've never really drinking a lot. It's not been my default social thing. I have come to enjoy craft beer. I actually really enjoy it. My wife and I love to have nice wine over dinner, that sort of thing. But actually have stopped drinking 99% over the last like 6, 8 months. And it's not for any like super big reason. It's just I don't think I really need it. And I definitely don't want it to be a default for me. Like I don't want to drink just because I'm going out to a gathering because it's expected. And that is very difficult for a lot of people. I bet I forget what it is. There's a guy who did a thing where he stopped drinking for a full year and he wrote a book or did a podcast or something about all the things he learned. He was a guest on a podcast that I listened to. And it was the idea of how it becomes difficult to be social because a lot of people who see you not drink feel the need to put pressure on you to drink for you. Oh, just like have a drink with us, be a part of the team kind of thing. I think acknowledging that that's not everyone's version of team building or bonding or whatever is huge to have the different types of events that you just mentioned. And also, I think naturally at events, a lot of the after parties revolve around drinking and just having other options, fancy teas, fancy whatever, to make sure people can
Smoothies.
participate, smoothies, whatever.
I
You
love a
can
smoothie
participate.
bar.
Yeah, I don't know that I've like had very much of a smoothie bar, but that does sound good. But that's a way to be a little bit more inclusive for people who don't necessarily have the exact interest that most people are gathered there for. And to be clear, not saying drinking is a bad thing. I'm not saying people shouldn't enjoy drinking, blah, blah. It's just if you don't, how do you kind of get something out of it so you can be a part of the thing too?
Oh, I mean, exactly. Even tonight, I am doing a bouldering thing with the local svelte community, which I set up because I didn't feel
Mm.
like doing another hanging out at the pub
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
The great part is you're not alone. Even here in England, there are so many people from different cultures, different backgrounds, different stages of life, where they're like, "Yeah, don't really feel like going to the pub." So whenever someone comes out with an idea for like, a brunch or climbing
Mhm.
or, getting together and enjoying smoothies or bubble teas in my case, it tends to be embraced. You'll be surprised who's going to come out. And even the people who do enjoy the boozers, they usually come along too, because
Mhm.
everybody loves some good fun.
Yeah, someone or Jason in the chat mentioned the cupcake brunch too. Desserts are my weakness by far. So I like anything chocolate, dessert, cupcakes, cookies that would absolutely be something I'd be very excited about.
And
Um,
there's going to be people for whom that is not an option as well. You can't please
yes,
everyone.
very true.
Variety is the
Yes,
key.
absolutely. Yeah, I actually just had someone in my family get diagnosed with diabetes who's now having to pay a lot more attention to what they eat. So that's a perfect example of not everything is for everyone, but the variety. And I think the variety too is like an opportunity for us that don't do a certain thing as often to learn more about. I've actually never had a boba tea or bubble tea or boba. Bubble tea, boba. Is that the same thing?
Oh,
I
we
don't
got to
know.
fix that.
Yeah, it's one of the things, right? Like I would love to have that experience. I just haven't before. So it also is a way for other people to try new things that they haven't experienced before. We said we keep it relatively short. You actually have a hard stop in 10 minutes. We've gone longer than I expected in a great way because I think that's just how good conversations go. But I do want to give you like 2 minutes or maybe a couple to talk a little bit about like you find yourself in a frustrating situation at work, whatever it is. Do you have any suggestions or tips and tricks or tools or something that people can use to help them take a step away from a situation, to get perspective, to regroup their mind, to reset, to approach it in some sort of way to work towards a more positive income than just being frustrated and maybe losing it on someone, for lack of a better word.
I think it is important to learn how to identify your emotions. A lot of the problems with frustration is that you get worked up. And it's interesting because I've done some research on this. There's a whole pile of ideas to untangle here. There's emotional regulation and dysregulation, there's mindfulness, and then there's like outcomes. And it turns out a lot of people in the industry, a lot of people in our industry and in the world period are not that great at emotionally regulating. Some
Mm.
people are people who are raised by perfectly well-adjusted families, and they had they watched My Little Pony's Friendship is Magic as they were growing up, so they have the whole repertoire of emotional vocabulary, and they can use their words, and they're very patient, and they are never stressed or short on time. Yeah, those people are doing great. The rest of us, it's easy, especially the more stressed we are, the more pressed for time, the more narrow our emotional window.
Mhm.
And this goes both for you and for the people you're working with. So, that super stressed executive might snap at you when their emotional window is super narrow. And they're probably not going to apologize to you, and you probably shouldn't expect it. But it's important to remember it's probably not you. It's just this person is internally being reduced. All of their coping mechanisms have been stripped back, and now they're in toddler mode. And that's going to be a lot to deal with. And you can become the toddler in some situations. You can be the stressed out one who's dysregulated and making things worse by continuing to engage in a dysregulated state. So the important thing to remember is to identify when you're dysregulated, because after this is it's called a amygdala hijack. It's when your amygdala, your baser part of the brain, sort of takes over and goes, "Oh, we don't need to think anymore because we're about to die, and I know exactly how to get you out of this, my friend." And goes cuckoo bananas on everything. And you don't want to respond to your boss the way you might fend off a saber-toothed tiger with spear and like fire. Don't do that. You won't have a job in the morning. So you need to be like, "Oh, dang. Uh, right now, I am the one who's being a lot. I need to remove myself from the situation." Or I think in Getting to Yes, it was called a balcony moment, where you kind of go to the balcony and you stare off into the metaphorical future and the distance, and you kind of mellow. You let your heart rate return to normal. And you wait, you give yourself some space and some time to think about things before you re-enter conversation, because nobody, when they have become dysregulated, is in a good place to discuss anything. You will say things you regret. You will make decisions you won't like. For me, I have, like, when I'm dysregulated, whatever decision I'm thinking, no matter how good a decision I think it is, I have to wait till the morning. Because almost every single time it's been a decision where me and my calm, wide emotional window self would be like, "That's a terrible decision. Why would you burn that bridge? Why would you shut that window?" Yeah, you could look at it that way. That's kind of an infantile response. You want to be the mature adult in this situation, making the best decision for everyone involved, and that was not it. So the best thing you can do is, one, know the signs for when you are in a dysregulated space. You're not at your best. You can work on that by working on mindfulness and learning to use your words to express your emotions. Women tend to be better at that than men. So men especially, go watch My Little Pony Friendship is Magic first two seasons. Really good. Or Bluey. Bluey is also good. Um, and number two, when you identify that you are dysregulated, have an emergency escape plan. Turn that Slack notification off, put an out of office thing, just had to pop out for an hour. Go outside, stare at some birds, do something physical that burns off all the cortisol and the adrenaline, and get yourself back to regulation. And then you can re-engage and you won't have regrets.
Yeah.
That's my emergency get out of jail free plan. I'm not sure what yours might be, sir.
Yeah, I love that. The recognition, I think, is huge. It's something I'm paying more and more attention to myself and my relationship with my wife and my professional relationship and my response to other things in life. The recognition, I think, is huge. And then I love the how did you phrase, like, the escape hatch, the emergency escape hatch or whatever. Do you recognize that? Pull yourself out immediately, whatever that means for you, like, whatever helps take your mind off that. For me, it's always been physical activity, so going for a run. There's a specific story I won't tell now, just not that it's a bad one, but I won't tell, but it was like I was so worked up and I just went and ran, and I ran, like, my fastest time in multiple years for however long I ran. Then I came back and I was like, "Okay, I'm definitely more able to cope with this than I was previously." Um, Paul on Twitter, by the way, welcome, Paul. Mentioned box breathing. Breathing is a great way to cope. I've done some breathing exercises in the past. I've also started not as near as much as I think I should, but doing 5 minutes of meditation just during the day, like put on some meditation music and just sit and do nothing for 5 minutes. And I've realized for me, my mind never stops. I'm always either doing something work related or something activity related, or I'm looking at my phone and I'm on social media and I have things coming in from all over the place that I rarely ever stop. And so just to have a handful of minutes where I'm doing nothing, whatever it is, I think is helpful and relaxing as well.
Sometimes playing a video game,
Yeah.
maybe you have Beat Saber or maybe you just have StarCraft. Sometimes that is all it takes. It's sort of like
Mhm.
I call it like waving the bone. You're like, "Hey, come here, come here." You throw it and like, the cardinal part of you that's just frustrated and wants to run away or fight, fight, freeze, just wants to take care of the problem. It's like, it's going, it's taking care of it.
I love it. Yeah, that many different outlets that people can have, video gaming, I think being one for a lot of people. Um, I don't know if you mentioned this or if this is part of like your brand and I don't know it. And okay, 60 seconds and then we're actually gonna call it because you have a hard stop. Lawrence mentioned
I do.
fractional DevRel. Is that something you can define in a few seconds?
Yes, I am available for fractional DevRel. Fractional is this great new term that we're using in the era of layoffs, which basically means, hey, you have a company, but you can't really justify a full team right now, correct? But you
Mm,
definitely know you need somebody to help out with your developer documentation, your dev advocacy, your developer marketing strategy, etc. You can hire people who would normally be, maybe staff or director
mhm.
at a place to come in and help you out on a spot basis. It's basically like freelancing, but at a more strategic level than just, writing a bunch of blog posts, etc. I've been seeing this crop up more and more. I'm available for it as well. Uh, and I've seen it work out really well, especially as smaller and smaller startups are hitting the market right now. It's great to know that you don't have to hit a certain size to have a team of people building your community and helping you to find a strategy for reaching the developers you want to work with.
Love that. That's perfect. That's similar some of the things that I do just in working for myself and doing dev relish type activities for other companies. And I think more people are doing that specifically, like you said, economy wise makes sense. You can't necessarily hire full time, but we can bring people on to do a thing or for a specific period of time. And it's almost an advantage for people that are able to kind of freelance doing that because it's a little bit easier for companies to bring that on sometimes than a full time employee.
And it kind of makes sense in some situations, especially for startups. What gets you to one section, like developer advocacy at the beginning of a startup's lifespan, to its after IPO, very different beasts. You don't necessarily want the same person for that for the full lifespan. So I think it makes a lot of sense in terms of structuring your company early, just to make sure you're hiring the right people at the right time.
Yep. Love it. Cool. Thank you everyone for joining in on the conversation. This was awesome. Glad we got to chat and
It's
we had to
always fun to
reschedule a
talk
couple
with you, James.
times. Yes, we had to reschedule a couple times, so I'm glad it worked out. Um, and everyone, there's links in the chat if you're interested in C3 Fest and React Summit in Amsterdam this summer. There's discount codes for those if you're interested. If you need the link later on and forget, just send me a message or whatever. But at least go and check those out. And thank you again for being here and chatting with me.
Awesome. Bye.
See y'all.